right, so we're here for an education stream. We got Steve-O with us.
Hey, howdy. How's it going, guys?
And Steve-O's going to talk about enemies and how to make enemies in Project Spark. And Steve-O, those of you guys who don't know, a combat designer, works on designing a lot of the enemy mechanics, like the Necromancer, for instance.
Yeah.
You did the Kodian Golem as well.
Yeah, I did the Kodian Golems. I did basically design the fiends, like the Void Fiends and what they would be doing, the different classes of fiends. I redesigned, for those who were here for the beta and alpha, I redesigned the Crossroads enemies, the bandits and the goblins there. Like if you were early, you might have saw some different bandits and goblins. So I redesigned like the tank and what he does and other characters. So yeah, and today we're just going to talk about like how do you do that, and not just third-person action enemies, but like just trying to understand how enemies behave and what they bring to the table in games and whatnot.
Cool. Yeah,
That's
Steve was
awesome.
a lot smarter than
Yeah,
this
we're gonna
stuff,
we're gonna all, me and Brian included, learn a lot about enemies. So
Yeah,
this is gonna be awesome.
I typically like to do this stuff in like a discussion at first, so it's kind of hard with not like with the community over there, and we're reading what you're saying, so not everybody might be hearing it or reading it at the same time.
Plus there's that 30-second delay.
Yeah, plus the delay. So even then, I'm still just going to talk about what you should generally do with enemies, not just in Spark or in third person, but what you want to achieve with all your enemies in your systems. And you're going to be driving, right? So
Sure.
just, for now, before we get into this, right, what we have in our scene right now is like a simple enemy. Then we have the enemies that you typically see in Crossroads or Champion's Quest, and then we have our like mini boss enemies. The reason why I like to call them mini bosses is because when you make a boss like encounter, you really want the boss to be interacting with the environment. But since our enemies are all about drag in and drop play, I can't really count on what your world is going to look like when you're using these guys. So there's a lot more to combat than just fighting and combatant. There's a lot of things that go into it. So you want to take into account your arena size, and are you going to have interactables, or are you going to have hazards? So those are what make a really interesting boss encounter. So with the Necromancer and the Goblin Chieftain, those are what I consider mini bosses, because you can still throw them in anywhere and they don't rely on your world as much. So if we're just throwing out some guys and you just punch them a little bit, and I can just talk about, whatever. So the first part of this, I really just want everybody to know that you're ready and able to do beautiful things in this world. So you're always capable to just jump into Spark and do whatever your heart desires, right? All right, so
lay off the punching.
good thing I got some of that stuff written down. So just to recap what I was just saying, you're ready and able to create beautiful things in Project Spark, all right? And these aren't the end-all be-all strategies. These are just some of the tools that we've used to make the game feel interesting and better. So I'm trusting in you guys to basically iterate on what we have here to make all your games better. Not just punching goblin games, but any game that involves some sort of conflict, and that's really what I'm going to get into. Why we have enemies is because just in life or in any experience, the essence of life is like creating growth or growing, becoming better. So in order to get better, there needs to be something in your way. You need to have some goal. So that's where conflict really comes into it. Without conflict, there wouldn't be any accomplishment. And the tension from conflict creates this interesting experience. You're not sure if you're going to win. You're not sure if you're going to overcome what challenges you. So that's really why we have enemies. And what makes enemies good in that space is that they come from this sort of like man versus nature, or this man versus monster, or man versus self. So those are different forms of conflict that you'll see in other experiences. And what we tap into in games typically are those three. There's a lot more than that. So what I like to do when designing an enemy is start off with the man versus monster, which is sort of this extension of who you are, like what you are as a player and what you're trying to drive. So usually there's something that is slightly different or slightly altered about you. If you think about like what vampires stand for and what werewolves stand for, they're all different things about human nature. the werewolf is tapping into becoming a beast, becoming more feral. You know, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. He's got his animal side, right? So why are those things interesting? Basically, we have our combatants fill that space. That's something we can focus on instead of just saying like the world is in disarray or I need to climb this mountain. If I put a character or an enemy or a combatant in the way where his goals conflict with mine, then I need to get past that opposing force, and that's what enemies stand for. And that's why we have enemies. That's why you see enemies in games, and basically combat is just a really quick and simple way to deliver conflict in an interesting way.
Oh, interesting. So like that
was so deep and
yeah.
beautiful.
So the genesis of enemies were basically we need to put conflict in your game. We need to give you conflict. We need to have things that make you need to overcome things, and that's where the enemy, just the general idea of an enemy came from.
Yeah, pretty much. Like we want to give you something to focus on, right? And the best way to do that is to have somebody in the way. And what makes a good enemy from that? Like let's just talk about like some superheroes here, right? Like why is Batman such a cool superhero, right?
And turn the volume like 1 or 2 more clicks.
Okay, we can keep
In-game
down.
In-game volume.
So why is Batman like a really super cool
No,
character?
down.
First of all, Batman has a lot of limitations, right? Like he's a detective, he uses gadgets, he's mastered martial arts to a certain point. But he at his core, you could still become Batman if you had money or the amount of training that he's gone through. You could do that. So who's the best rival to what Batman can do? I think a lot of people would probably say the Joker, right? Like the Joker is also a man. He doesn't have any super abilities. He's pretty crazy, but if we break it down, you'll see that Batman and Joker are pretty much crazy on the same scale almost. Batman can't stop fighting crime, but he won't ever kill anybody. He might just break all your bones and make you want to die, but he doesn't kill anybody. But the Joker's the opposite. Also, Batman is like he takes this dark figure and makes it good, right? Where Joker takes this light figure and makes it bad. He will kill you. He will probably kill you by making you laugh to death, right? So how do these two meet? They have these similar goals. Batman wants to stop crime. Joker wants to create chaos, and he wants to really push Batman's buttons. He's focused in on one goal, just like Batman's focused in on one goal, stopping crime. So the Joker kind of wants Batman to step over that line, and that's what makes Batman a hero, is that he won't ever do that, while Joker is a villain, a good villain, because he constantly pushes our protagonist to the limits. He pushes them past that threshold. So to sum that up, to make a good combatant is to have them grounded in the same reality, have them have the same limitations, and challenge one another. What their paths cross because some goal that conflicts with each other. We just talked about conflict and why you need that to have good enemies, but you don't want to just have guys who are bad just for the sake of being bad. You want their paths to cross in such a way that their goals conflict with each other and makes them relatable. I mean, you might cheer for like Dexter, this guy who's like this. I don't know if I can actually talk about that. This
No,
guy.
you can.
Okay.
Yeah,
This serial killer who kills serial killers, right? Like, you start to sympathize with him, which is bad because he's still a killer, but
right.
he's doing something that's stopping other killers, you know. So those relatable villains are deeper and more fun. Let me just check my notes here.
You're so much more prepared than we ever
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
I've had notes for I think total of 2 streams. You've been prepping notes for this for a while now.
Yeah, there's a lot of knowledge that I've learned while I've been on Dakota, and I mean I brought in a lot of knowledge, but there's a lot more that I can learn because there's different constraints with Dakota. Like a lot of systems for creating enemies would be in place for me, while here I sort of had to think about how I could create these structures myself to use things that I was accustomed to. Yeah, so now we'll just kind of go into like how enemies work and what we're doing. So what have you been jamming on over here? What's going on?
Keeping it really basic. I just have this like little gang of trolls. So
Okay.
I just went in, and I think this is like as far as I've got is like as far as I think most creators will get. So they'll go on here, they won't really look at the brains too much.
Yeah.
You know, they'll drop in like a custom enemy from, you know, the gallery here. So here's your, you know, different options. A lot of times it's the scavenger, the bruiser. These are all just bruisers that I just dropped in here, and you know, I went in and kind of changed up their appearances. I figured out, so like, you know, one of the, you know, easiest ways to change combat properties is actually go in here into the combat properties, and you have all the different options about health and, you know, damage and things like that. So this guy was kind of the big bad of the group here. So I increased his scale to make him a little bit more aggressive looking and changed his color, gave him a little bit more unique look, increased his health. But other than that, I didn't, you know, go much further than that. I think that's where, I think after this point is like, you know, where creators start thinking about like, how do I take this, you know, to the next level, right? After just doing those kind of simple changes.
Yeah, so maybe this is where they start to struggle, right? So now we've got a cast of 3 guys, and you've done some really cool things here. You know, you've got different silhouettes, they've got different colors, and maybe they don't have different functionalities right now. I mean, they might do different damage to each other, but they're probably, if we jump in the game, maybe they'll all just like run at you, and then
that's exactly what's gonna happen. Just disclaimer, we are on an internal build, so that message will pop up once in a while. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, it's probably got something to do. Later on, we're going to expose all the brains that have been hidden for a while. These are just brains that we use in Crossroads and Champions Quest, but it allows us to create enemies a lot quicker. Okay, so talking about what's going on screen, you know, not just in this philosophy space. We're gonna start talking about stuff here. So yeah, all those guys just ran in and they were just trying to punch you.
Yep.
So what makes enemies work really well is having specific roles and having specific purposes for each enemy. So maybe that big guy was supposed to challenge the, you know, we talked about what makes good enemies is how they challenge the player in some way. So the big guy, maybe he needed to make the player jump out of the way or stop his AoE or something like that. So I think this is a good time for us to like slowly creep into the different 3 enemies we got there.
Yeah.
So you're just using the simple brain. Let's look into their brains and see what's going on. So yeah, this is the simple melee enemy. He just seeks an attack. So what that means is he'll just try to find a player which is about 20 meters away. So if you go to 20 there. So he's just looking for an enemy, and he defines his enemy as anybody who's not on his team or any player neutrals. Why player neutrals was important for us is that when you're in the tutorial space before the new tour came out, we didn't know what team you were on. So you were a neutral player. We knew you were a player, so we wanted the enemy to still attack you so you can punch him and feel really cool about stopping him. So we had to add this line in there. He's also using the nearest object, which is just as you go through the enemies list or the nearest player neutrals list, you'll find an enemy and you'll define yourself that. I also wrote this brain, by the way, so this is like one of the first tasks I came and did to make this guy less aggressive, more interesting, but still simple. So
right, it's only what, 8 lines of code?
Yeah, let's go down. How many lines? Yeah, so 8, I think it was 12 when I got here, and I was like, how am I going to get this down to anything less? So what makes this guy interesting when you put him amongst his buddies is that he has a random pause.
He does, yeah. I switched it to it's 1 out of 3, but
that's fine. So that's less pause.
Yeah.
But what that allowed us to do is that when he got to you, he's gonna pause for a second. So a couple of his buddies are gonna either punch before he does, or he's gonna punch first. But they really don't coordinate or work with anybody. When you see enemies in film, such as like Bruce Lee, Last Dragon, if you've read like my bio, you know, I love those kung fu movies. Enemies really like to circle around each other and wait for the greatest opportunity before they run in one at a time and punch.
Right?
So like what you want with your enemies is sort of this structured stupidity, if you will. So it's structured chaos, it's structured stupidity, because like you know this guy's gonna attack at least once a second, or if we go into a more advanced enemy, one of them is gonna attack out of the group. So you know this guy is really interesting because he's simple and he'll get the job done. You'll have enemies in your game. but he lacks diversity. What we really want is to have different guys fulfilling different roles where they have different strengths and weaknesses, require different challenges from the player. Because ultimately, we want every player to be trying to interact with the enemy or via observations and decisions. The more a player has to think about what they're doing, the more intense the experience will be, the faster the combat pacing will be, and whatnot. So
that totally makes sense. Hence, like Dark Souls, right?
yeah.
Right.
The more times you have to change your strategy, the harder the game is, right? So there might be enemies that punish like different mistakes that you make.
Gotcha.
So,
Very cool.
Yeah, I've also noticed, like, one question I've always had is how smart and how stupid do you make enemies? How do you walk that fine line? Because I always, at first, make them really smart, and then it becomes just annoying and hard, and then I make them too stupid, and it's hard for me to find that balance.
Yeah. So that is a really great question, and this is a question that a lot of AI guys in games ask each other, right? So they're like, how do we make our guys seem smarter? It's not actually smart. We can make a super intelligent enemy. I could design an enemy that would beat you in rock, paper, scissors every single time. After a few goes, he'll learn your patterns, and every time that you adjust your pattern, he will adjust with you and start to predict what you're going to throw out before you do. And there's other sciences that will, force you to think of a number, right? You might be on Facebook and go through that test where there's like, think of some number and they predict what number you're going to pick. So these are all solved things. Why this is important is we're not trying to make the enemies smart. We want them to seem smart. How do we make the enemies seem smart? Is have them react to the player more often. That's what makes enemies seem smarter. If they, if you're playing different games by other studios like Destiny, when you first engage an enemy, they do some sort of call out. They let you know, like, oh man, there he is. There's our opponent. They signal to other people. And it's all these things you might start to think about, but maybe they're just playing an animation. Maybe it's just a taunt animation. But it starts to mean so many more things to us, like, oh, he must be yelling at me some sort of slur, or he must be alerting his buddies. And that's where this next group of guys comes in. So we don't want to delete your guys, just template them out, and we can start playing with them later. He's got like a shield guy, axe guy, brawler guy. Yeah, we're gonna start to make some cool stuff here.
You're starting to do interesting stuff.
Yeah. So we don't need to show the simple guy because those are what those guys were. But if we untemplate this golem here, who's running the standard brain.
He's running his standard brain?
Yeah, they're running the standard brain you might have seen on some other characters. We'll just play them. Oh, you can hit always ignore it, I think. And
Yeah,
Well, actually,
I think I think it's
Yeah.
actually every time it autosaves, it's doing that.
Yeah.
Throwing that
Okay.
out.
So let's notice some interesting things that are happening here. This guy backs up if he's reacting to you more, and if we started off further away, we'd actually see him wander. So it seems like he's doing intelligent. He doesn't stop wandering.
Okay.
That's another.
It's intentional, right?
Yeah,
He'll follow pursuit.
Yeah. So they never break their engage. In other games, you might be able to outrun people, but because of the drag in and drop nature of these guys, I never knew if you were going to be able to get far enough away from them, or how far, or what type of terrain.
Or if that would even be the
Yeah,
intention
so-
of the creator.
Yeah, so for most of the time, if you're putting an enemy in your world, you probably want him to fight the character. But let's start off. Let's move Kia back. That's where our avatar is here. So if we restart. Always got
let's
it.
do the.
Did you tab over? Yeah,
Yeah,
there
you
you
got
go.
it.
Always. So if we notice, this guy is just patrolling or wandering. We can't really tell what he's doing, but he's doing something. He's doing something interesting. What those other goblins do is they just stand there. They're so
They
simple.
just move their
They-
fingers.
Yeah, they just sort of idle. But this is sort of his idle behavior, his idle state is to wander. And what we'll see in those brains, we'll jump into those brains a little later after we fight this guy, is that we could swap this behavior in and out as long as it's an isolated idle behavior. So he might patrol from 2 points. He might actively search sounds if he hears something in his idle behavior. But for this guy right now, he's just a standard guy, just idle. He just turns around every once in a while and he starts to walk in a direction once he figures out where he wants to go. However, if you try to sneak up on him and he detects you,
There you go. Yeah, he turned correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, he will turn towards you and start engaging you. Some of the other guys will actually show like an angry face sometimes, or they'll do a little behavior. They'll alert their other buddies. You'll see him like crossroads, they'll jump and things like that. So now he's going through a bunch of his other states that will probably be better to depict when we jump into the brains. But let's find him just a little bit more. The interesting things about him is that what makes him work well is that he communicates to the player when he's going to attack, and he gives you time to respond, right? It's all about making observations and making decisions. If I think I can get a couple more hits in right before he's going to attack, maybe I will keep trying to hit him. But if I don't know when he's going to attack and I get surprised, it's not going to be fun. It's going to be frustrating, right?
Yeah. So you have that like exclamation point as like a visual cue, right?
That's one of the elements, and there's a light that actually turns on as well, the light up the ground depending on where you are. His fist will start to glow red when he's in his attacking phase. There's some tiles in there that people might not be aware of. We have access to when somebody's winding up, when somebody's actively attacking, and when somebody's recovering. From your animation 101, you might remember this, that there's this like anticipation phase, there's this sort of active or attacking phase, and there's a recovery phase. You'll see that in a lot of fighting games, and we have access to that. So the first red cube there,
this is that idle behavior.
yeah, it's the idle slot and the wandering brain.
So are they hidden brains?
These are the hidden brains. Let's look at what's on the golem. Let's
okay.
look on the golem first. So I'll talk about what's going on here. We'll go all the way to the top. The first thing that we show with the golem is that he's on team 2. A lot of the other enemies will have this like team hierarchy where there's like zombies are on a certain team and large creatures are on a certain team.
That's right,
and so they'll always fight with each other by nature. A lot of the enemies in Champions Quest, because we want to utilize the other teams, are just on team 2. So that's that. The temporary health display brain, just when this guy takes damage, his health bar will appear above his head and let the player know that he's taken damage. The remove attachment brain, there's nothing really special in that. I didn't share that out in this level, but all it does is for each attachment, when I die, remove it. The enemy light brain was a critical brain for crossroads when you are in a dark or an environment that had no light, because you can make up any environment you want. We wanted you to be able to see the enemies because it's not fun running into a pack of people that want to do you harm. So now we get to the really, really good stuff. So as you can see here, there are behavior slots. If you remember from your other tutorial stream, talking about brains and brain variables and popping in and popping off brains, we can store a brain into a variable which we can then use as our state for where the enemies and what they're going to be doing. So the first state is the idle behavior. This is their default state. They start off in this sort of wandering behavior, or whatever you want them to do: patrol, wander, search, whatever. After that, we jumped into a pursue behavior because we've identified a threat or something that we want. We're going to go after it. How do we pursue it? Are we going to run after it? Are we going to teleport? Are we going to dodge out of the way? Are we going to burrow under the ground? Are we going to start flying towards it? Whatever we want to do. In this state, we can do a lot of things. For this character, it's just chase. He's just going to run. But you can start to imagine that you can utilize this state in a bunch of cool and interesting ways. After that, we've sort of gotten to this combat range. This is the range that we know we can start attacking. We're not attacking yet. We might be circling around our prey, waiting for the right opportunity to attack. We might just run straight in there. We might need to have the most aggression, the most courage to fight who are about to fight right now. So we're waiting in that state, and what do we do here? Are we going to circle around? Are we going to back up? Also in this state, if a player approaches too much and you're not ready to attack, let's say you don't have courage, you're going to back up. You're going to go into another state that we'll talk about in a second. After we've determined that we've have enough courage or whatever condition we've given it our combat ready, we're going to move into our close-in. Now this is an interesting state. It's right before you start attacking. We want to give the player some indication that an attack is coming before the attack starts, even if there's a wind-up. This is when the enemy starts to approach the player. Why this is important? Because we're always trying to communicate to the player that something is happening. You need to make a decision here. For this character, all they do is just close in. They just walk towards you, maybe a little slower, and they get ready to go into their attack. For other characters, they might teleport behind you. They might burrow under the ground like some of our zombies do. They might jump into the air. Something that's a transition or approach. After that, we go into our attack. For this character, it's real simple. It's just a punch. It's a overhand cross or something like that. It's a punch. During that phase is when we can manipulate the wind up. Do we want him to slow down to charge up his punch, or do we want to show the exclamation point? Do we want to shake it? Do we want to play sounds here? Do we want to, when we jump into this brain, at that point we can set all the damage that the guy wants to do. So maybe you have a hard mode and you want to adjust damage. You don't have to adjust damage once the game starts. You only have to adjust damage once they're getting ready to attack. After they've completed their attack, what do? It's not fun to have and we saw with the simple guys, to just have them stand there in most cases. And if we're trying to satisfy different roles, we might want to have different exit strategies. For this guy, it's just backing up. It gives the other enemies around him, or if he's working in a group, an opportunity to get in. It also makes the character have to pursue him a little bit and actively try to chase him down. Not too much to be frustrating, but it just creates this sort of like this dance, this sort of waltz of like who's attacking now and who's getting ready to attack. And for him, it's just retreating. Then we go into brains that are kind of always running. This isn't an actual state. It's just something that needed to be running all the time, but we added it in as if it were a behavior. The nearest targeting brain. Why this is important is because our enemy or the player is going to be moving back and forth, or he's going to be closer or not. And we need to calculate who's close to us, who do we want to target, who do we want to attack. For this character, again, really simple. So he just chooses the nearest target. He communicates to his buddies that I have the most aggressiveness. I'm getting ready to attack. And we'll go into these brains a little bit later. There's some additional stuff below here.
Cool. I had a quick question,
Yeah,
actually.
sure.
So would you say then these brain variables that are all along down this side, these would probably be then just common things that you expect like every enemy to have, and this is like that state. And then these are the roles that are fulfilling that particular need, right? So these would change between the type of enemy, but this list here is pretty much going to be consistent across your enemy.
Yeah, and this is the backbone for that, right? This allows you to make tons of enemies very quickly, because each state knows that it can just pass on to the next state, but it doesn't have to be aware of what's going on in one state. So they're very isolated, and like I said, you can change up wander and orbit and all that stuff. And you don't have to do this for you can do this in a different way, I should say, for like your space combat games or your RPGs and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So does everything basically in Project Spark, does everything basically have those where it looks like there's a wander, there's a chase, there's an orbit around the character, there's then closing in, and then there's a basic attack and a retreat? Is that this kind of standard, the usual for
This is
combat?
this is what we found. It's not always the standard, right? So there are different ways to orbit around something. Maybe you don't need a wander. Maybe you know that the type of game you're having is room-based, so you need to clear the room, or you need to clear some objective in the room. Thus, you always know where the enemies are, you know where the player is, and there is no reason to idle. You know,
That makes sense.
You're just gonna always start in engagement. You're not gonna watch them wander. For open world experiences, you probably want them to wander so you can walk into a pack of them, seeming like they're doing something interesting, and attack them. But no, I wouldn't say this is what every Spark character should do. This is just one of the things that you can use to create a variety of behaviors.
It makes sense, especially if you're working on your first enemy, though. Like, it makes sense that the sequence you want for an enemy is first they chase you, then they'll kind of orbit around you, they'll like look for their moment in, then they'll close in, and that's when they do their attack, whatever you attack. And then after they've done their attack, then they might back out to go back to the orbit. That progression right there, that makes a lot of sense for kind of an enemy you might start.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's what makes it really fun when you're in a lot of these encounters. Sometimes the encounters go by so fast you don't really notice. But there are other enemies in Spark that break these rules. Once we understand the rules, then we can break them in intelligent ways. We don't want to break the rules out of ignorance. We want to be doing so purposely. So the reason why this is a standard guy is because we use this guy a lot. He's the backbone of the army or of our enemy base, and then we have guys who break that up, such as like the fighter or the fodder or the scavengers, which they will just engage you or build rage faster, so they're ready to attack faster. They have other attributes on them that allow counter attacks. So our scavengers and fodder guys will just run in and will not orbit. They will bite, but we still give the player, using the same system, an opportunity to counter that, even if they've made a mistake. So after they sort of attack you twice, they taunt right in your face. They don't move or anything. At that point in time, you have some time to either retreat or continue your assault or jump out of the way. Whatever you want to do, the options are yours.
Gotcha. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Sweet. So what's this part? Is this initializing, I'm assuming?
Yeah, this is pretty much initializing stuff. We didn't want to use that kind of language, but yeah, this is where we call the attributes on the next page, and then after we call the attributes, which is like the stuff that you changed before in that nice, sexy window you had there.
Got it.
This is just like changing the wander speeds, the weapons that they have. My weapon is a really interesting way for storing what kind of weapons. By having everything called my weapon, when you have trigger zones or you are working with a lot of enemies, you only have to reference that enemy and its weapon to override it. So like if this guy normally has a sword, I can just say, well, change my weapon to an axe, and it'll just equip it afterwards. So yeah, if you do that before that equip line happens, then like if you're calling an enemy into the world, you can do that. And later stuff we were working on is we had that happen randomly. So you would throw down like a standard guy, and he'd have like a sword or a shield, or he'd have a mace and other things like that.
Oh, that's cool. I did something like that in one of my community games way back when, where like I didn't, I wanted these guys to spawn, but I was like, I don't want them all to have the exact same sword, so it would forget how it was basically randomized, if it would pop with like an axe or a sword, because it just made it more interesting, right?
Yeah, and with that you can like override what the random is after the random, right? So that way you can say like, I want X to be random, but I always want 3 guys with shields or something like that.
Yep.
So then all these other variables are in the other brains as they're broken up that they've referenced. So if we want to do any overrides to the standard or the basic behavior, the base behavior, we can do that here if we were making some other enemy that's similar to the standard or basic guy. I hope I made that make sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
A question probably a lot of people had and I had initially is, why do you usually, so with this initialized stuff, you can call it whatever, you're calling it attributes because this really is just setting a bunch of number variables for all the attributes. Why do you find it more beneficial to have all this stuff on one page as opposed to like at the very top of your first page, just so it's easier to segment? Or
yeah, it's just housekeeping, right? Like, so I know on every enemy that I create, I can just flip over to the attributes page, and if something's going wrong, I can comment it out here. I know where all my attributes are. If I put them in between on the first page, then I have to look around, I have to scroll up, and if you're familiar with Spark, you know that scrolling and moving around and moving logics of code, large chunks of code, is difficult. So this is all for ease of use and best practices. It's easier to have everything on the initialized page because now I know where to go. If I need to copy this entire page, I can copy this entire page. If I need to debug anything, I can start doing that here.
No, that makes sense. You even have it broken down further where like all the related ones are under a child line together, right?
Yeah, exactly. And those are the type of things that I do just for readability. There's no comments in our game, but there's different ways you can start to break up stuff so that it makes more sense. And that's, if we look at the Necromancer real quick, because I think a lot of people were complaining at one point that, we're starting to hide all these brains, and I want to see all the brains. I want to see what makes these cool guys do cool stuff. You'll see that wanders here, and if we scroll through all the other pages, all the stuff I was just talking about is the same things here. The reason why we broke it up into different brains is it's easier to work in brains in our game and save the brains out, and it allows us to just swap in brains quickly if we want to iterate on an enemy. So if I have time, I like to break everything back down or squish it back into one brain, but often at times I don't because we want to pump out new enemies and move on to a new pack as fast as possible. So there's nothing new here. It's just a different way of doing it. Cool. So we can jump back over to the guy now.
So probably a community question right now would be, why do we hide brains? For this enemy, why was his brain not accessible?
Yeah, so we didn't want to clutter up. You'll see. There's a lot of brains. Can we go into the edit mode real quick?
Yeah.
So let's see. This rainbow colored brains here are all his different state brains, and if I want to start changing up wander and orbit, if I want to start changing this up, let's say I made like chase 2, which teleports to the guy, and then I make a chase 3, which burrows under the ground to a guy. This is going to start to bloat your brain gallery, and for people who are just jumping in the Spark, and they're going to see all these brains that do all these really cool title names, but have no idea how to use them, or they can't just throw them on anything and work. And we want everything to be as accessible as possible. So this was a constant battle we had where, in order to make a cool experience, we couldn't make this as accessible as we wanted. So that's pretty much why we keep it hidden. It's no magic here. This is all the same stuff that everybody else has. It's just easier to have it under the hood, away from everybody who might want to grab a brain and just have it do something cool. Just have it orbit. You might, as a new player, think like, oh, this is like orbit around the moon, so I'm gonna throw it on my guy and I'm gonna see him orbit, and that's not.
Orbit brain.
Yeah, that's not gonna work. These brains actually turn on and off depending on what state the character is in, so what behavior they have on. So orbit is the action, and the slot of it is the combat ready. So that's how I've broken up all these brains, and I think at some point we'll be able to share this level out, right?
Yeah. We were actually just talking before the stream. So for these enemy brains, there's nothing actually. I don't think we have enemy brains that have challenge info hidden in them or XP info hidden in them, right? It's
there's this one brain called enemy objective. It gives it allows you to get XP from enemies. It allows you to access the challenges from enemies. At one point, we wanted to share that out as well. That's the only thing that's going to remain hidden like forever. You can throw it on your guys. It's probably not going to do anything. But that's the only thing that these guys have that's like super secret, the secret sauce, right? But it's still like one of those things where you can buy like the Chick-fil-A sauce. You can still buy the packet. You can still throw it on your guys. It's not going to do anything, but it's still cool.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So we were talking about the fact that we will, we're going to start sharing. Start with the enemies, sharing out the brains that are hidden. Steve will put this together, so we'll try and get this one out soon. We'll look at the other brains too.
Yeah. So how are we doing on time? Oh man,
15 minutes.
I know.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff in here. These brains are really simple to go through. Let's jump into orbit and talk about that, because that's that's like the backbone of these guys, right? Like if we can jump out for a second. Copy the golem, make like 3 golems, right? Yeah. That's fine. So that's 4 golems. We'll run in there and we'll see what's different between the golems and those other goblins we had earlier in the video. These golems spread out. They have like these distances that they want to maintain. Once they're ready, they start to approach the player and they give them a good punch, right?
Yeah,
so this is more
turns.
Yeah, this is interesting because like if I want to attack all the golems, it's going to be hard. If I had a cleave like a maneuver like Carl does, maybe I can only get 2 of the golems because they're always moving around me. They seem like they're doing something interesting. So they're also whiffing and being silly sometimes, but it just creates the tension there that like these guys aren't always accurate. So so how do we create that? We'll go into the orbiting brain. You can delete these guys freely. They don't reference any of these brains right now, but they do use a similar structure. So let's go into orbiting. What do we do here? Well, the first thing we do is I have like some debug stuff. I like to have my debug stuff in pink. You can ignore that. Of course, I didn't think people would really be seeing this stuff anytime soon, so I just kept it cool. He adds another brain. Unfortunately, we couldn't get through all this stuff, and I'll probably write up some documentation to explain it. But there are additional brains that do cool things like attack armor, giving you super armor for when you attack and whatnot. So the first thing we do is add aggression. Aggression is what I've been talking about. Once I have enough eagerness or courage, I'm going to start to go in and punch you. So that's just another brain. Because we can change that in different ways. Like we can do aggression so that if you have a certain amount of hero tokens, if there's like 3 melee guys attacking you, we don't want any more than 3 melee guys ever attacking you. So once one of the melee guys dies or moves away, he gives you back a token. There's just another way we can do aggression.
Mm-hmm.
Or something that you might be more familiar with is World of Warcraft, like having aggro because you've done more damage to this ally. So every time we come into this brain, we're going to be turning on the aggression brain. If we didn't have the aggression brain, we're going to add it. From there, we're going to decide which direction we're going to start moving. Are we going to move left or right? This line of code up here, the starter to move left, it's just a 50-50. Am I going to move left or right? That's which side I'm going to start orbiting to. If my targeting brain, because everything is isolated, just in case some error slipped through, if my targeting brain is not active at this point, I'm going to turn that on. Targeting, like I said before, it figures out how far away the player is, and it does that in an efficient way so that it only asks about every 3 frames, like where the player's position is. It's not asking the player's position all the time. It actually ties into some of the tips you're going to talk about later about using detect and distance to characters. From there, I want to. This character is like, well, if I'm close enough to him, or if he's too far away, I'm going to switch back to my pursuit. So if I'm too far away and my target out of range variable has been hit, I'm going to switch to pursue. I'm going to turn off this state. I'm going to make pursue my next state, and then I'm going to jump over into pursue. That's the other brain.
This is actually a really good way to actually show also why brain variables can be really useful.
Thinking that, yeah.
Because like you have this slot called next state, and that is just the next brain that needs to start running, and then you can just switch in and out brains to that next state whenever you want.
Yep. And the best practice, you want to make sure that you're turning off the brain that you're in before you leave, and you just want to make sure that everything works by itself, just in case. So that's all these lines are doing there. If my target is in my combat range or less than that, then I do my signaling. That's the letting everybody else know that, look, hey, look, guys, I have the most aggression now. I'm the coolest guy in the party. I'm going to go off in an attack, right? And the signaling actually lets this guy go into the next state, which would be closing in. So there is no call to closing in here in that other page. It's only in the signaling page after that. So how does signaling work? It's a good question. So signaling works with the highest aggression. We want to go through our list of enemies that are close. So we're detecting a spear around our target, and we're making sure that any of our allies in that spear have less aggression than us. Thus, we have the most aggression. If we don't have the less aggression than our enemy, or than our ally, then we do not have the most aggression, and we need to wait. So that's what this whole thing does in a nutshell.
So this is only running like 1 frame.
Yep.
Right.
Just calls this page once you're close enough and you're ready to attack. So once you have the highest aggression, that's when you switch it to the next state. We can go back into orbit.
And if you don't have the highest aggression, nothing happens.
Nothing happens. You'll actually, if the hero gets too close to this enemy, he'll back up. Again, we want to make it seem like they're being smart, and they're like, oh, well, I'm not, if you're really not ready to attack somebody and you're scared, you might flail at them, but for these guys, we just want them to back up. While they're backing up, because we won't be able to get to that brain in time, they're actually gaining more aggression than they would normally. So,
that's interesting.
Yeah, so if you're targeting, this is to say if we're targeting this guy, if I'm a hero and I'm targeting this enemy, I'm going to be making the enemy I'm facing or getting close to more aggressive, getting ready to attack me. So there's this dance again where they're communicating with each other.
Yeah, that's so smart.
Yeah, so back off doesn't always mean walk backwards. It could, for some people, some behaviors, we could have them stand there and start to power up or do something, so. Then it gets into some really interesting stuff where we're figuring out how to move to the player. We want to move to them directly. We only want to change left or right direction if we're in such a range that we're not close enough to attack, we're not ready to attack, but we're not far enough to want to enter pursue. So at that point, we're going to stand around and look menacing. Other games would have it so that there's several layers or 3 rings where they're the outermost ring, like in God of War, will have their enemies just taunt. They won't do anything threatening. They'll just stand there and look like they're going to get ready to do something or cheer on their buddies. In the second ring, and this is the ring that we're trying to simulate, they will actually move around their target as the other guys get ready. The first ring closest to the player, those guys are closing in, getting ready to attack. So it makes this constant shift. It looks like everybody's doing stuff, but it's actually not. It's just
So, question on from people on stream is, what does directly do? Move towards target directly.
So why
use directly?
Why directly is important because we have under the hood a little bit of obstacle avoidance. So if you put something in the way, they will start to calculate like, oh, I want to move out of the way, or I want to slow down once I got close enough to my guy. A lot of times you'll see that the allies used to like do this like stutter step. So we wanted to have this nice like smooth transition in. So we added this like base behavior that everything will smoothly slow down, accelerate, and decelerate, right? So directly bypasses all that stuff because I have some other code in here that is just like, well, I know how fast I want to move towards the guy and I need to get there fast directly. So don't do any of those other calculations because I handle all that stuff myself.
Got it.
So if we go down, and that's where we do this. If you guys remember Ari, who does really, really cool stuff, he helped me out with this. This is anti-hysteresis, which allows the enemies to slow down when they get to the player, and we're calculating how fast we should move. So
Anti-hysteresis.
Anti-hysteresis, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
so that's right.
Yeah.
Knowing is half the battle.
Concept, my head, over.
Yeah, so
No.
just copy this line of code if you need it. It'll most of the time you won't, because we kind of do that stuff under the hood now. But if, like I said, we've been making enemies for a while, and at a certain point, it was easier to do it this way and have more control. This allows us to take into account combat range and how fast we want to move. Do we want them to jog in? Do we want him to slowly creep in if they're coming towards you? Calculating their centers and normalizing all that good stuff is just like some icing to make these guys feel really smooth and engaging.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I think
That's
that's pretty much it. There's probably some lines under here. Last lines that are just like, well, detect my list of allies, and if I'm within that range that, like I don't want to be right on top of guys because that's not what real people would do. So at all times or every couple of frames, I want to make sure that I'm an arm's length or whatever length I set away from my buddies. That could make the encounter more interesting because everybody's spread out. It could make, when they're chasing you, make them feel like they're actually not just all gang up in one point so that they overlap and attack you all at once. So, yeah, there's a lot to this here. Didn't know that we were going to need more than an hour.
We could probably go for 3.
Yeah. Like, this is the first couple of brains. Yeah, but feel free to dive into this. The way it's set up should make sense as we go from red to purple. Those are the different states that I had talked about in this video.
Yeah. There's aggro, which you called in that orbit, right?
Yep.
And
so
then your target.
Yeah, so you can add these brains separately. You can change these brains if you wanted to, and have the player have your enemies call them. I keep calling them player and stuff because I treat the enemies as if they were champions. Like, so Claude was always making the good guys, and I was always making the bad guys, right? So we had this G.I. Joe kind of relationship where I was always making the Cobra, the challenge, the cool things that he was coming up with, and we'd work together to think about what cool things the champions could do, and we'd also work together on what cool things enemies should do. So I considered the enemies the heroes of their own story. So that's how I work. So
that's cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to make sure we touched on, so like when you're moving between each of these states then, is each brain then any of these is like doing the next one? Basically, you go down the row.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if there was like an overarching story to it.
So what you do when you add these brain variables on, there'll be a main page, which we can go to on the Kodian guide. This page here, this first page is like the main page. We add these things only once. But after this add, we keep going, and anything that we want to happen multiple times, such as going down a little bit, such as checking for when my target dies. In this case, once my target dies, I'm going to taunt I'm going to remove all my targets if he's the last target from my target list. Just make sure it's completely empty. I'm going to set my alert state, which is like the escalated, I'm angry, you've agitated me, back to false. And then I'm going to go back to my start behavior, like I was just freshly placed. Like I'm going to go back to wandering.
Page
Yeah, don't worry about
line
this.
21. Having countdown timer just like that. Does that default say after 1 second
Yeah.
my target equals 0? So
Yeah,
you don't
so-
have to actually say countdown timer with anything if you just say countdown timer. That's
Yeah.
just one.
Yep.
1
So
second?
it will just say
Mhm.
countdown timer after 1 second, which is 30 frames. I will negate my target. I'll get rid of him. What that allows us to do is if your character takes time to die, as long as it's under 30 seconds, he'll be removed properly. If he takes too long, then he'll still kind of be around and it'll mess up the behaviors.
That's actually good to know. I actually was running into issues with setting my target to be equal to nothing right after it
Nope.
dying.
It's still there for a good amount of time for its
Yeah.
death animation. And if I work with the animators a lot, and we have this understanding that we want to have death animations short, about 30 seconds. Gives them enough time to give that like really, oh no, this is it moment, but it also gives us time to say like, okay, do something cool here, like dance around for about 30 seconds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm sure there's tons of questions, and I could talk about this for days. We didn't even get to the boss, but just to understand that the Kodian guy here, the Kodian Golem, is actually like similar to the boss. The only thing that differs from the Kodian guy is that the boss has 3 attacks. And
That's right, and we saw those
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
There's attack 3, 2, and 1.
Right. So the only thing that we do here is in the close-in phase, he decides what attack he wants to do. And other
Is it
enemies,
random?
it's random.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So it's random from 1 to 3. You can set up your own logic here, where you can be like, oh well, I want him within a certain range to always use attack 1, or at a certain range use 2 through 3. And stuff like that.
Yeah,
So,
or if I blow half health or something like that.
yeah,
right?
you can give him more attacks, access to more attacks. So that's just the power of the close-in state, or having things broken up into different states. At different points, you can start to do different things. None of these attacks rely on each other, and if you fought against this guy, you'll see that his attacks are pretty interesting, but they don't need any information from each other.
Yeah. So I do want to reiterate. So this is like the same Necromancer that's available to everybody right now, as long as
Yeah.
you have the Necromancer Eyes.
Yep.
And you've taken, so all the logic that would be in here is like flattened into pages in him. So
Yep.
if you want to kind of go through here and look more deeply, you can actually do that right now in the Necromancer by checking all these different pages out.
Yep, so check them out. There's some debug text like I said up there before, but it's all the same state stuff. It's everything that I've talked about, and once we make the brains more accessible, you can start to set up and have swappable enemy behavior just like I do.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Any last minute things on enemies?
You want to have different specific roles again, like having a guy who, for us, we have guys who are anti-range and anti-melee. That's how we set up our system, but you usually want to have it broken up into a role of how you're going to challenge the player. So you might have emphasizers, which don't require you to use any sort of mechanic, but they really encourage you to do a mechanic. Let's say there's like a weak point on them. If you shoot them in the weak point, they die instantly, but if you don't, it takes 3 hits. That's an emphasizer. Another really good enemy to have is sort of like an enforcer. This guy can only be beaten by a certain mechanic, so he requires that the player learn and exploit this mechanic in order to progress.
So is this why after I get the grappling hook in an adventure, I have to now use the grappling hook to defeat the boss?
yeah. So it's part of boss behavior. Yeah, it's sort of testing you. It just wants to make sure that you understand how the grappling hook works, so that when you see those type of bosses or something similar to that boss later on, you'll know what to do. And that's a really cool moment. That aha, I know what to do here. I've done this before. There's other types of enemies that range, such as like the mini boss and how you want to call those. For me personally, I like to call mini bosses or any type of boss a transcender. They require that you do something beyond just understanding how the mechanic works. They usually force you to think about the mechanic differently or do something really cool.
Okay, keep on scrolling. Good.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot we are...
Yeah.
We're
Careful,
so just
careful.
don't go to the D's.
Okay, I will
So-
not. I
so
was
that's-
looking for... Where's my chieftain?
Yeah.
This guy.
So yeah, he was like the first mini boss in the game, right? And he kind of founded the structure for the Necromancer and what we do with mini bosses.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so if I go,
So you can grab him, yeah.
see what he has. So we'll see that exact similar
Similar
things going
stuff. So
on.
like he's like the prototype. Like so he's half flattened and half not. There's like some other. I think he has like an armor on. I haven't looked at him in a long time actually. He used to have this sort of armor that you couldn't fight him until he was stunned. So you had to like run away from him or not get hit by his rush, and then he would become stunned. His armor would dissipate, and you'd be able to hit him. So. Yeah, and for those of you who are seeing like the ignore lines everywhere, I like to keep those in there so that when people jump in and start to play around, they might like add the ignore lines and take them out and see what I can do. So like,
Well, that's interesting. You had an ignore line in there. Every time they're hit, they get slower and slower.
yeah. So you'll see this in action games like Devil May Cry, right? Certain games, when somebody's attacking you, they're not going to just hit react or be canceled out of their attack. They're actually going to slow down just a little bit so you feel like you're getting that one extra hit in, but you're still going to have a consequence, right? So is it worth getting that extra bit of damage? Am I going to kill them with that next hit? Or it wasn't worth it, I'm going to get hit and I'm going to die because they're still going to get their attack off. So this guy started off using that kind of behavior. It was a cool way. But, our awesome test team was able to find some exploits, some problems with it. So I'll leave this in your hands to decide what you want to do with it.
That's awesome.
Imagine now him just like frozen after his face gets set down to 0.
Yeah.
Yep,
cool.
so that's pretty much what happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have some notes and documents here too to pass on. So
Awesome.
That's cool.
Usually,
that'll have to
that's
go up on the
much
blog.
better than my chicken scratch notes that I usually have.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought I was gonna have enough time, not run out of time. I thought I was.
I know. Yeah,
It always
we got
goes
so much
way
to talk about
fast,
though.
Yeah.
Man, they're talking about stuff that starts with D, huh?
So, I guess for everyone who made it this far into the live stream, into the video, we can at least say something about what's coming next. Project Spark.
That starts with a D.
Yeah.
Wait,
So we made the tease on Friday. Next pack in Project Spark is called Dungeon Descent, and it comes out June 11th, which is next Thursday. We're gonna have a stream this Thursday where we show off all the stuff. It's the next best pack in Project Spark by far.
I've heard it, I've seen it, and that pack blew me away. There's so many cool things you can do in that pack.
Yeah. So that one, definitely tune in Thursday, 3 p.m. Pacific time, where we will show off, rip the hood off this thing. We won't be ripping the hood off of it anytime before Thursday, but Thursday comes.
You'll want to tune in, that's for sure.
You will, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, this guy was pretty much like Raiden for me.
This guy's like impossible when you're playing as Carl Snore.
It's-
Just
Oh,
saying.
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, I used to beat him with cars all the time. It's all about like dodging that rush, right? So it's just getting out. So if he gets one hit off on you, his rush will have been successful and he won't be stunned. But if he misses the rush, he'll
right.
become stunned. And yeah, there's just communication, right? Like he does some things that are like anti-range. He does some things that are anti-melee.
Okay, that's the rush. So he needs to miss. Okay,
There
then
you
he
go.
gets stunned.
Yeah, you got some time to really get in there and do your damage.
Probably can get 3 off.
Yeah. It's really fun. People really liked it. He was set up to be like a co-op experience, so his health is super high. We brought that down. But yeah, he utilizes all the void stuff, and it's just super corrupted.
Don't you fight 2 of these guys at one point?
Yeah, I
That's
know.
right.
I know. It was awesome.
It's
Yeah,
hard.
so I set up that encounter too, where it's just like in God of War, there was a point where you're fighting like ogres or giant guys, and they do really cool things with their encounters where it's health based instead of just enemy count based. So once the first chieftain gets to half health or some percentage around that, you spawn in another one just to make it more exciting.
Oh, I have range.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you that. Yeah, so also the way Kia is set up is how I set up most of my characters so that they feel similar to a champion. So the biggest thing on there is like a similar camera to champions, which is the boom cam with controls.
I'm sure people are going to want a
Yeah,
very
so-
quick peek at that. Where is that in here?
Yeah, it's a quick peek. So every time I throw down a new character, I just put on boom cam with controls. That's like one of the first things, and I like to do my attacks just a little bit different. Sometimes you set them up for like heavy attack on Y, but I like.
I was expecting so much more than just boom camera with controls.
That is similar to a Champions camera. You'll be surprised. Yeah.
Wow.
Any last words of wisdom, Stevo?
I think that's pretty much it. I think I covered as much as I could. We had a little bit of a summary of all the stuff we did. To make interesting enemies, you want to make the player react more often. You want to make sure that they have a purpose. They fulfill different roles. That's how you have depth in your variety of your cast to make your game interesting. And we talked about how you can execute those things. So.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully you guys learned stuff. I actually learned.
I feel like I have to go change all my enemies now.
Yeah, my enemies are
Everything I've ever
ashamed.
Yeah.
That's cool. I hope they enjoyed it, and we'll talk more. I'm thinking about streaming at home more or doing some sort of tutorial stuff there. Maybe this is a shameless self plug, but yeah, I'm thinking about it.
Do it. That's awesome. Yeah.
All right, guys, we'll be back on Thursday. That is a stream you definitely want to tune into. Again, we'll be showing off. I know I tend to say the next pack is the coolest pack, but this is...
This is the coolest one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Steve-O approved.
Create your game as you play? Any Spark can do it. Spark, activate the portals.